Ajnana-timirandasya Jnananjana-shalakaya Chakshulmanitanjena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Gurave Gaurachandraya Radhikaye Tadalaye Krishnaya Krishna Bhaktaya Tadbhaktaya Namo Namaha. Yam Pravajantam Manapeta Apeta Krityam Dvapayano Viraha Katara Ajuhava Putreti Tanmaitaya Taravo Vinedus Tam Savabhutam Hridaya Munimanatusmi Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaivanarottamam Devim Saraswatam Vyasam Tato Jayamudirayat Bhaktya Vihina Parada Lakshay Kiptastakamadi Tarangamadye Kripa Mai Tvam Sharanam Prapanna Vrinde Namaste Charanarvindam Tave Vasmi Najivami Tvayavina Iti Vigyaya Radhe Tvam Nayanam Charanandike Vancha Kalpatarubhascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Okay, so, sorry, my TENS machine disconnected, so just give me a second. All right. We begin by offering our most humble obeisance unto the lotus feet of our beloved gurus, unto Sri Guru Pada Padma Nityalila Bhavishta Om Vishnupad, Asto Tarsat Sri Srimad Abhayacharya Aravinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, and the same unto Sri Guru Pada Padma Nityalila Bhavishta Om Vishnupad, Asto Tarsat Sri Srimad Bhaktivedanta Narayan Goswami Maharaj, and to our exalted Rupanuga Guru Varga, and to all the assembled Vaishnavas and Vaishnavis. Okay, so yesterday we began Srila Prabhupada's extensive purport explaining the tattva, the philosophical side of the identity of Advaitacharya, as a special incarnation of Mahavishnu, describing the functions of Mahavishnu directly and indirectly in charge of the material creation. Right? And he began by explaining that there are two versions of this, of how everything came about. The spiritual version based on the descriptions, realized descriptions of the Vedic literature, and then the materialistic point of view, which is echoed by modern materialistic scientists. And he gave Baladev Vidyabhusan Prabhu, the beginning of it, the version of the Sankhya philosophers, which is interesting because the Sankhya philosophers go a little deeper in their material analysis than scientists, because they speak about the modes of material nature. And they use the model of Mahat Tattva, right? And the evolution of the senses and the sense objects, right? Which is the Vedic paradigm. But they, even though they are using Vedic literature, they're not accepting the deeper connection with the original cause of the creation, which is the fully conscious Supreme Lord and his different incarnations. So, very interesting. You know, they use logic, they use some evidence from the Vedas, but they reject the other because they're atheistic, which is points out that understanding from the spiritual perspective requires a certain adhikar. You could say a certain accumulated spiritual piety, because the same evidence, the same statements are available for everyone, but some are inclined to take it and some are not. Right? And it's the same way. I mean, in which chapter is it? I think it's 6th chapter of Jaiva Dharma, where in the debate about Brahmanas and Vaishnavas, the idea of faith is introduced as that which gives eligibility for Vaishnav development, right? But it's also, faith is that which gives one the ability to adhere to any system of knowledge or any belief system. What kind of faith you have determines where your beliefs will lie. In modern terms, it's called cognitive bias, right? You are imprinted from birth by association through education with particular belief system, and then you're going to see the world through that lens. And the older you get, the more difficult it is to break through and break out of that. The beauty of bhakti, however, is that the samskars that you acquire through bhakti are very powerful. So at any time of life, if somebody, by good fortune, by the mercy of a great devotee, begins to have that kind of association with devotees and with acts of devotion, then they may be able to come to acceptance of the spiritual principle, right? And then further on, the identity and the conception of devotion. Not just the impersonal spiritual principle, but the personal spiritual principle. So, now he's going to continue the description of the senses, and from the materialistic conception, the Sankhya's. The two kinds of senses are the 10 external senses and the one internal sense, the mind. Thus, there are 11 senses, right? So we heard this yesterday. 5 knowledge-acquiring senses, which is, the nose, or, which allows us to have smell. The eyes allows us to have vision. The tongue, taste. The skin, touch. And the ears, to hear, right? And the working senses are the arms, the legs, 2 arms, 2 legs, and a set of genitals. And this is how you interact with the material nature, right? Work. So according to Kapila, material nature is eternal and all-powerful. Originally, there is no spirit, and matter has no cause. Matter itself is the chief cause of everything. It is the all-pervading cause of all causes. The Sankhya philosophy regards the total energy, the Mahat Tattva, the false ego, and the 5 objects of sense perception as the 7 diverse manifestations of the material nature, which has 2 features, known as the material cause and the efficient cause, right? So we heard those words before, right? Nimitta and pradhan, right? So, the Purusha, the enjoyer, is without transformation, whereas material nature is always subject to transformation. Although material nature is inert, it is the cause of enjoyment and salvation for many living creatures. Its activities are beyond the conception of sense perception, but still one may guess at them by superior intelligence. Material nature is one, but because of the interaction of the 3 qualities, it can produce the total energy and the wonderful cosmic manifestation. So he's going on to explain how they consider the development of the complexity of matter, right? Although it's initially in a singularity, you could say, but by the influence of the 3 modes of material nature, then it becomes diversified, right? It produces the total energy and the wonderful cosmic manifestation. Such transformations divide material nature into 2 features, namely the efficient and material causes. Efficient is, The Purush, the enjoyer, is inactive and without material qualities. Right? So efficient being, nimitta, and the material being the upadan, right? So the Purusha, the enjoyer, is inactive and without material qualities, although at the same time, he is the master existing separately in each and every body as the emblem of knowledge. By understanding the material cause, one can guess that the Purusha, the enjoyer, being without activity, is aloof from all kinds of enjoyment or superintendence. Sankhya philosophy, after describing the nature of Prakriti, material nature, and Purusha, the enjoyer, asserts that the creation is only a product of their unification or proximity to one another. With such unification, the living symptoms are visible in material nature. But one can guess that the person of the enjoyer, the Purush, but one can guess that in the person of the enjoyer, the Purush, there are powers of control and enjoyment. When the Purush, and every time it says Purush, it's not like the Lord Purusha. The Purusha also means the individual living entity, right? The controller, the enjoyer. He's talking about it in that context. They're not recognizing a higher divine entity. When the Purusha is illusioned for want of sufficient knowledge, he feels himself to be the enjoyer. And when he is in full knowledge, he is liberated. In the Sankhya philosophy, the Purusha is described to be always indifferent to the activities of Prakriti. This is very interesting. Somehow or other, they've not explained how this Purusha has evolved from the material energy, but they jump at this point to say that it does exist and it interacts with the material energy. And when it interacts, identifying with itself as the enjoyer, interactor of material energy, then it's an illusion. But when it becomes aloof from the material energy, then it's liberated. So if it's created by material energy, right, how could it become aloof from material energy? How can it become aloof and liberated from that which it is created by? How can it become indifferent to its own cause? He says the Sankhya philosopher accepts three kinds of evidences, namely direct perception, hypothesis, and traditional authority. Okay, so direct perception is what we can acquire by our knowledge, by our senses, or what we can acquire from the collective knowledge of other people and their sense impressions. You go read books, read an encyclopedia. Hypothesis is the inductive method. Okay, I see this, I see that. Okay, what does all this mean? Let me draw some conclusions. And traditional authority. Now, what is that? Is that what I just said, the conclusions of other persons in the culture of these materialists? Or is it some scriptural authority? Or is it scriptural authority based on direct perception and hypothesis, not from, not handed down, not realized traditional authority? Anyway, when such evidence is complete, everything is perfect. The process of comparison is within such perfection. Beyond such evidence, there is no proof. There is not much controversy regarding direct perceptual evidence or authorized traditional evidence. The Sankhya philosophy identifies three kinds of procedures, namely parinamat, transformation, samanvayat, adjustment, and shaktitata, performance of energies, as the causes of the cosmic manifestation. Okay, three procedures: transformation, adjustment, and performance of energies. All right, that's how they say it happens. Now, Sri Baladev Vidyabhushan, in his commentary on the Vedanta Sutra, has tried to nullify this conclusion because he thinks that discrediting these so-called causes of the cosmic manifestation will nullify the entire Sankhya philosophy. Materialistic philosophers accept matter to be the material and efficient cause of creation. For them, matter is the cause of every type of manifestation. Right? That's their idea. Whereas we heard in the beginning here, we accept two kinds of nimitta and upadan. The efficient cause, original efficient cause, being the desire of Mahavishnu, and upadan, he is the source of the living entities and the ingredients, subtly, and then he transmits them by his glance and by his representative, Shambhu, who is a special kind of incarnation, special form of Lord Shiva, who carries the living entities. He is the time factor, which is the activating principle, and then he inspires his consort, reflected from Lakshmi Devi, reflected from Rama Devi, and that is Mahamaya, Parvati, and she is the source of the unmanifest collective material energy, the pradhan, like the womb, and Lord Shiva, or Shambhu, he takes that creative impetus and injects it, the desire for creation, into Mahamaya, along with the living entities. And then she, inspired, takes on that same desire, because the desire of Shakti reflects the desire of Shaktiman. Like when Krishna has a desire, Radhika immediately has the desire to fulfill that. That becomes her desire. It's non-different, right? And she creates very clever ways to fulfill Krishna's desire. That's what pastimes are all about. Leela, right? That's what the Dham is all about, the creation of the Dham in Vrindavan and all its varieties and all the inhabitants. It's the fulfillment of Krishna's desire, which becomes Radhika's desire. So secondarily, Mahamaya takes on that desire, and so she becomes the secondary efficient cause and the secondary ingredient cause, material cause, right? Because she's the womb, she's the holder of this unmanifest material energy, and injected by the desire and the will of the Lord, right, through his glance, and by their union, then transformation can take place. And by the, you have the great Mahatattva, which is again another form of this. It's the first form of the development of the material creation. And then the three modes of material nature, by the influence of time, act on that Mahatattva, and then it becomes differentiated, right, by senses, sense objects, and sense organs, which are the ingredients for creating all living entities, right? So, Sri Baladev Vidyabhushan, in his commentary on the Vedanta Sutra, has tried to nullify this conclusion because he thinks that discrediting these so-called causes of the cosmic manifestation will nullify the entire Sankhya philosophy. Materialistic philosophers accept matter to be the material and efficient cause of creation, not Mahamaya, right? They don't see the conscious entity, the real energizing force behind it. They think that matter itself does it itself, just like scientists. Somehow or other, there's some unmanifest singularity. It had no qualities, had no form, had none of the characteristics of matter as we know it now, but for some reason it exploded and became the material universe, first in subtle, the simplest of atoms, and then by collision and some interaction of energies, more complex atoms, and then molecules, and then planets, and then somehow or other some life forms all came about, then dinosaurs, whatever. But even though they've never witnessed such a thing, and science is based on observation, not pure speculation. If you're going to use sense perception and hypothesis as a methodology, you have to have something to base it on. You just can't have a hypothesis with nothing to support it. Right? So it goes against every way in which the material energy acts. But that's another. Okay, so Baladeva Vijayabhushan. Materialistic philosophers accept matter to be the material and efficient cause of creation. For them, matter is the cause of every type of manifestation. Generally, they give the example of a water pot and clay. Clay is the cause of the water pot, but the clay can be found as both cause and effect. The water pot is the effect, and clay itself is the cause. But clay is visible everywhere. A tree is matter, but a tree produces fruit. Water is matter, but water flows. In this way, say the Sankhites, matter is the cause of movements and production. As such, matter can be considered the material and efficient cause of everything in the cosmic manifestation. Srila Baladeva Vijayabhushan has therefore enunciated the nature of pradhan as follows. So they're saying that, we can see that matter transforms itself, right? We can see that. But how did a tree come about in the first place, right? What caused clay to become a pot, right? It just doesn't happen. You never see water pots coming up on the bank of a river where there's so much clay. You never see any organization of matter unless acted upon by an outside intelligent force. You can get the simplest of organization, but that very quickly, by the influence of time, degrades and disassembles, unless, like our houses here. They were created by somebody, but without constant attention and upkeep, they're falling back into the earth. Right? So, Baladeva Vijayabhushan has enunciated the nature of pradhan as follows. Material nature is inert, and as such, it cannot be the cause of matter, neither as the material nor the efficient cause. That's the nature of matter. You have to go back to its original nature. It is by itself inert. So how can it be an efficient cause of anything, nor even material cause? Seeing the wonderful arrangement and management of the cosmic manifestation generally suggests that a living being is behind this arrangement. For without a living brain, such an arrangement could not exist. One should not imagine that such an arrangement can exist without conscious direction. In our practical experience, we never see that inert bricks can themselves construct a big building, nor do we see that clay can make bricks by itself, right? Individual bricks. Clay can harden and become rock, but where do you see that it makes perfectly formed bricks? Right? The example, and you know what? Even the forces of geology that create very interesting kinds of formations, mountains, even some things that appear to be ordered. The stalactites, stalagmites. Some very beautiful expressions of material nature, but behind everything in material nature, unseen, is the force of consciousness. That's more elaborately described. But he goes on to explain very simply, to just address their initial hypothesis. The example of the water pot cannot be accepted because a water pot has no perception of pleasure and distress. Such perception is within. Therefore, the covering body or the water pot cannot be synchronized with it. Sometimes the material scientist suggests that trees grow from the earth automatically without assistance from a gardener, because that is a tendency of matter. Okay, so it's going on everywhere. We see forests, there's no gardener, there's no intelligent there, right? They also consider the intuition of living creatures from birth to be material. But such material tendencies as bodily intuition cannot be accepted as independent, for they suggest the existence of a spirit soul within the body. Actually, neither the tree nor any other body of a living creature has any tendency or intuition. The tendency and intuition exist because the soul is present within the body. In this connection, the example of a car and driver may be given very profitably. The car has a tendency to turn right and left, but one cannot say that the car itself as matter turns right and left without the direction of a driver. A material car has neither tendencies nor intuitions independent of the intentions of the driver within the car. The same principle applies for the automatic growth of trees in the forest. The growth takes place because of the soul's presence within the tree. So they don't understand the nature of the soul. And even though they're saying that the soul comes about by matter, they're trying to, or the Purusha, the enjoyer, it's just matter. What's the difference between a living tree and a dead tree? What's the difference between a living body and a dead body? The same things are there. Oh, but it's an old body, it broke down. Well, sometimes very young and healthy bodies, all of a sudden the soul leaves for some reason. We don't know. And they die, and nobody can say. Cause of death, natural causes. The heart stopped. Okay. Why did it stop? Because the soul left the body. Anyway, sometimes foolish people take it for granted that because scorpions are born from heaps of rice, the rice has produced the scorpions. The real fact, however, is that the mother scorpion lays eggs within the rice, and by the proper fermentation of the rice, the eggs give birth to several baby scorpions, which in due course come out. This does not mean that the rice gives birth to the scorpions. Similarly, sometimes bugs are seen to come from dirty beds. This does not mean, however, that the beds give birth to the bugs. It is the living soul that comes forth, taking advantage of the dirty condition of the bed. There are different kinds of living creatures. Some of them come from embryos, some come from eggs, and some from the fermentation of perspiration. Different living creatures have different sources of appearance, but one should not conclude that matter produces such living creatures. And scientists are so proud of their capacity for observation, which is increasingly quite remarkable. I mean, with the quality of microscopes that they have nowadays, they're looking deeper and deeper into the functioning of the cell, and even down to the level of observing DNA molecules with all of their complexity. But the deeper they go, the more complexity that they find and the more questions that arise, right? Because a single cell now has so much in it that is interdependent, for it to be functional even. And how did that stuff all come together? Where's the efficient cause for that? Right? A single cell is like the most incredible complex factory that produces its own energy, transports different kinds of energy to different parts. It has its own source of locomotion. It produces, reproduces and restores its own DNA 1 billion parts per second, right? And so much more complex that I'm not going to get into it, but I've been watching a lot of this lately. All the things that are going on in a cell. How could that just randomly arrange itself to such a degree that it's independently functioning? It's impossible. There's no mechanism for that can be defined materially. Even a modern factory, if you want to create a factory, a simple factory, just to make some cars, you have to constantly import materials. You have to constantly fix machines. You have to have power sources. So many things have to go on in that factory. And unless all of those things are going on or arranged perfectly, and you have conscious beings, you can set up a factory ultimately to be autonomous by artificial intelligence nowadays. But even that is arranged and created by a conscious being behind it all. There's always consciousness and intelligence behind it. You can set it up that it's self-maintaining, but ultimately it was created by a person, right? So, the example cited by materialists that trees automatically come from the earth follows the same principle. Taking advantage of a certain condition, a living entity comes from the earth. According to the Brihad Aranakya Upanishad, every living being is forced by divine superintendence to take a certain type of body according to his past deeds. There are many varieties of bodies, and because of a divine arrangement, a living entity takes bodies of different shapes. When a person thinks, I am doing this, the I am does not refer to the body. It refers to something more than the body or within the body. See how carefully, step by step, Srila Prabhupada is explaining this. Very logically, the conclusion based on Vedic evidence, but the logic and step-by-step connection that he's building. These are very structured and effective arguments that we should know. As such, the body, as it is, has neither tendencies nor intuition. The tendencies and intuition belong to the soul within the body. Right, even when the body is sleeping, the soul inside is sleeping, the body doesn't do anything, right? When the soul is awakened, then it will do. When people go in comas, you can poke it, you can stick it, you can do so many things. The soul is there keeping it alive, but it's not directing it to do anything, to interact, right? Material scientists sometimes suggest that the tendencies of male and female bodies cause their union, and that this is the cause of the birth of the child. But since the Purusha, according to Sankhya philosophy, is always unaffected, where does the tendency to give birth come from? That's a contradiction in their conception. They define Purusha as independent and unaffected by matter, and yet, in order to explain the sequence of things, they need some instigator, some motivator. And so they ascribe that to the Purush, but then in such a way that contradicts their original definition of that Purush. So, sometimes material scientists give the example that milk turns into curd automatically, and that distilled water pouring from the clouds falls down to earth, produces different kinds of trees, and enters different kinds of flowers and fruits with different fragrances and tastes. Therefore, they say matter produces varieties of material energy, of material things, on its own. In reply to this argument, the same proposition of the Brihad Aranakya Upanishad, that different kinds of living creatures are put into different kinds of bodies by the management of a superior power, is repeated. Under superior superintendence, various souls, according to their past activities, are given the chance to take a particular type of body, such as that of a tree, animal, bird, or beast. and thus their different tendencies develop under these circumstances. The Bhagavad Gita, 13th chapter, verse 22, Purusha prakriti stohi, bhunkte prakriti jan gunan, karanam gunasangosya, sad asad yoni janmashu. The living entity in material nature thus follows the ways of life, enjoying the three modes of material nature. So now, by referring to Bhagavad Gita is accepted by all schools of philosophy, all that follow and accept evidence from the Vedanta, from the Veda. It's considered the summary of all Veda conclusions. And it's so clear with this same philosophy. So, quoting that verse, the living entity in material nature thus follows the ways of life, enjoying the three modes of nature. This is due to his association with that material nature. Thus he meets with good and evil among various species. End quote. The soul is given different types of bodies. For example, were souls not given varieties of tree bodies, the different varieties of fruits and flowers could not be produced. Each class of tree produces a particular kind of fruit and flower. It is not that there is no distinction between the different classes. An individual tree does not produce flowers of different colors or fruits of different tastes. There are demarcated classes as we find them among humans, animals, birds, and other species. There are innumerable living entities, and their activities performed in the material world according to the different qualities of the material modes of nature give them the chance to have different kinds of lives. So, we'll stop here, and tomorrow he has the conclusion of this. Thus, we understand that Pradhan cannot act unless impelled by a living creature. So we'll give like a 2-minute summary of what we read today, and then move on to this particular conclusion. Very amazing. Very amazing indeed. Should study these things and study also the supporting evidence, because the Vedic scriptures give detailed analysis of the introduction of the real Purusha, the Mahapurush, and then the dependent Purushas, namely all the living entities, and how the material nature and they are energized and subsequently interacting. Okay. Anyway, I'm just trying to hang on to this very high. Okay. So, all glories to Srila Prabhupada, all glories to Srila Gurudev, all the assembled Vaishnavas, Vaishnavis. Haribo, Haribo.